My name is Audrey, and I am exactly 33 years old today. 10 days after giving birth to premature twins and surviving the intensive care unit at the military hospital, I walked into my Chicago home expecting a warm welcome. Instead, I found my suitcases piled by the front door and my husband sitting on our couch with his arm around his wealthy boss. He tossed divorce papers onto the coffee table, smirked, and told me there was no room for me anymore. He demanded I take my babies and get out into the freezing snow. I had no idea that just a few short months later, he would be watching his entire life crumble on live television because of the very woman he threw out. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic partner who completely underestimated your worth. Before the betrayal, I had built a successful life based on strict discipline. I was an Army Cyber Command officer specializing in digital security. My career was my absolute pride, but when I discovered I was pregnant with twins, severe complications forced me into a medical discharge. My high-risk pregnancy meant I had to step away from the military to focus entirely on bringing my children safely into the world. My husband Derek was a financial manager at a prestigious investment fund in downtown Chicago. When we bought our house, I used my military benefits to secure the loan and drained my savings for the down payment, truly believing I was investing in our future. But as my pregnancy progressed and I was confined to bed rest, Derek grew very distant. He complained about medical bills and the heavy burdens of impending fatherhood. I excused his behavior, trusting that holding his children would finally change him. The birth of my fragile twins was traumatic. They arrived prematurely, and I suffered complications that landed me in the intensive care unit at the Veterans Affairs Hospital for 10 grueling days. During that time, Derek visited exactly twice. He claimed his boss, Camilla, demanded his constant presence to close a critical merger. I lay in my hospital bed, recovering from major surgery, and fighting for my babies' lives, believing my husband was working hard to secure our financial future. Finally, the doctors cleared us to go home. Bundled up in their car seats, the medical transport dropped us off in front of our house. It was the middle of winter in Chicago, and the temperature had dropped below freezing. I struggled up the icy walkway, a car seat in each hand, my body aching with every step. I expected Derek to open the door and welcome his family home. Instead, I had to unlock it myself. The moment I stepped inside, a wave of unnatural cold hit me. The heating had been turned off. Before I could set the carriers down, I saw 5 large suitcases. My suitcases stacked haphazardly against the entryway wall. Confusion clouded my exhausted mind until I walked into the living room. Derek was lounging on our expensive leather sofa, holding a crystal flute of champagne. Sitting pressed against him was Camilla, his 42-year-old boss, the vice president of the investment fund. She was wearing a designer silk dress and looking at me with sheer disdain. I stood there, shivering uncontrollably, holding my 2 premature infants tightly, desperately trying to process the unbelievable scene unfolding. Derek did not stand up or look at his children. Instead, he reached into his jacket, pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, and tossed them carelessly onto the coffee table. Divorce papers. "Sign them now," he commanded, his voice entirely devoid of human warmth. I stared at him, struggling to bridge the gap between the man I married and the stranger sitting before me. "What is going on?" I asked, my voice trembling from the cold. Camilla took a slow sip of her champagne and smiled. "Derek has just been promoted to senior partner at the fund," she announced, her tone dripping with arrogance. "And as part of our new arrangement, he is moving forward with me. We are consolidating our assets." Derek nodded, avoiding my eyes but maintaining a cruel smirk. "Camilla is giving me the life I actually deserve, Audrey. I cannot be tied down by a broken veteran and 2 screaming kids. Camilla does not do crying babies. Therefore, this house is now ours. You need to leave." I looked at the divorce papers, then at the suitcases, and finally at the tiny faces of my sleeping twins. You want to throw your newborn children out into a blizzard? I asked. The house is in my name, Audrey. Derek lied smoothly, banking on my current physical weakness. I have already had the locks changed and your bags are packed. If you do not walk out that door right now, I will call the police and report a hostile trespasser. You know how the system treats unstable veterans. Sign the papers, and maybe I will give you cab fare. Camilla laughed a sharp, grating sound. Do not be difficult, Audrey. Take your little mistakes and go find a shelter. The sheer audacity of their entitlement washed over me, replacing my shock with a cold, terrifying focus. I did not cry. My military training activated instantly. I knew arguing with a narcissist while holding two fragile infants in a freezing house was a losing battle. I needed to secure my children first. I looked Derek straight in the eyes. I will not sign anything without my lawyer, I stated calmly. I turned around, picked up the babies, and walked into the brutal Chicago winter. Sirens wailed in the distance. Derek had actually called the cops. He truly wanted to destroy me completely, but my counterattack was already taking shape in my mind. Before my hand could even turn the brass doorknob to leave that icy hallway, another voice pierced the tense silence of the living room. I paused and looked back over my shoulder. My mother-in-law Martha strolled confidently out of the kitchen. She held a crystal wine glass, the dark red liquid swaying gently with her measured steps. She wore a smug, triumphant expression that perfectly mirrored her son's. During my entire high-risk pregnancy, Martha had barely called me. While I fought for my life and the lives of my premature twins in the intensive care unit, she had been completely absent. Now seeing her sipping expensive wine in my living room alongside my husband's wealthy mistress, the entire twisted picture came into sharp focus. This was not a sudden emotional impulse from Derek. This was a carefully calculated family ambush designed to destroy me when I was at my most physically and emotionally vulnerable state. Martha stepped up beside Camilla, placing a reassuring hand on the older woman's silk-clad shoulder. She then leveled a glare at me that dripped with absolute, unadulterated venom. "Take your brats and get out of this house," Martha snarled, pointing a manicured finger toward the heavy oak front door. Derek deserves a woman of high society, a woman who understands how to build a real empire. He does not need a broken veteran dragging him down with endless medical bills and crying babies. You thought you were so incredibly clever, did you not? You used your military V alone to buy a property you can barely afford to maintain. You genuinely thought that piece of paper made you worthy of my son. We let you play house for a while, but your lease has officially expired. Get off our property before I throw you out myself. Her words were clearly meant to humiliate me into submission, but they only fueled the burning resolve spreading through my chest. Martha had just openly admitted the undeniable truth they were desperately trying to bury. I was the one who secured the financing for this home. My years of dedicated military service, my dangerous overseas deployments, and my spotless credit history had purchased the very floorboards she was standing on. Derek had contributed absolutely nothing to the down payment or the mortgage. Yet here they were treating me like a pathetic charity case. They were finally evicting from their kingdom. I refused to give any of them the satisfaction of a reaction. Without uttering a single word in response to her vile speech, I adjusted my grip on the heavy twin infant carriers. The babies were sleeping peacefully, swaddled tightly in their pale hospital blankets, completely unaware of the monsters standing just feet away. I turned my back on the three of them, pushed the heavy door open, and stepped out onto the porch. The brutal Chicago winter hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The temperature had plummeted to -5 degrees Celsius, and a vicious wind whipped fresh snow violently across the icy driveway. The freezing air immediately bit through my thin hospital discharge clothes, chilling my recovering body to the bone. I needed to get my children into a warm vehicle immediately before the exposure harmed their fragile lungs. I hurried down the snow-covered concrete steps, planting my boots carefully so I would not slip on the treacherous black ice coating the path. My reliable silver SUV was parked in its usual spot at the very end of the driveway, already accumulating a thick layer of snow on the windshield. I reached into my heavy winter coat pocket, with a freezing, shaking hand, retrieved my electronic key fob, and firmly pressed the unlock button. Nothing happened. The headlights did not flash brightly as they usually did. The familiar mechanical click of the locks disengaging never came. I pressed the button again, pushing down much harder this time, willing the doors to open. The vehicle remained completely unresponsive, a giant metal box locked tight against the storm. Panic briefly fluttered in my chest as the cold seeped deeper into my skin. A sharp, cruel laugh echoed clearly over the howling wind. I spun around to see Derek standing on the front porch under the amber glow of the security light. He seemed completely unfazed by the biting cold whipping around him. He leaned casually against the wooden railing, holding up a gleaming new set of silver keys. The metal jingled brightly as he dangled them from his index finger. "Did you really think I would leave you with the car?" he yelled over the storm, his voice laced with malicious amusement. "Camilla bought me a brand new, upgraded security system. I had the dealership change the electronic locks on the SUV this morning while you were packing your bags at the hospital. You do not own anything anymore, Audrey. Everything belongs to us now." The sudden extreme drop in temperature quickly began to affect the babies. The biting winter wind cut straight through their thick blankets. From the carrier in my left hand, a sharp, high-pitched wail erupted into the night air. It was immediately followed by a desperate, breathless cry from the carrier in my right hand. My premature twins were freezing, and I was locked out of my only shelter. As the babies cried louder, the distinct, piercing shriek of police sirens cut fiercely through the snowy neighborhood. Red and blue lights began reflecting brightly off the snow-covered trees, moving fast and heading directly toward our address. Derek stepped back into the warmth of the doorway, his smile widening into a look of pure, unadulterated evil. "I reported a hostile trespasser," he shouted over the blaring sirens. "Let us see how the police handle a deranged military veteran harassing an innocent family." He slammed the heavy oak door shut, the deadbolt clicking loudly, locking me out in this terrible storm to face the authorities completely alone. Sirens wailed, red and blue lights flashing through the heavy snowfall at the end of the street. I braced myself against the freezing wind, wrapping my body around the twin carriers to shield my babies from the biting cold. My military training demanded I stand my ground and state my case clearly to the responding officers. However, dealing with a hostile husband who had already spun a false narrative was a dangerous gamble. If the police perceived any aggression, they could easily separate me from my newborns. I calculated my options in fractions of a second, realizing survival required a tactical retreat. Before the first police cruiser turned the corner, blinding headlights pierced the blizzard. A dark sedan fishtailed into my driveway, tires crunching over the thick ice. The vehicle screeched to a halt mere inches from where I stood. The passenger door flew open, revealing the illuminated interior. A desperate, commanding voice shouted over the roaring wind. "Get in right now," the driver yelled. I squinted through the snow and immediately recognized the driver. It was Naomi, my sister-in-law, an African-American woman married to Derek's younger brother, Gavin. Without wasting a second, I hoisted the infant carriers and threw myself into the back seat. I secured the babies with shaking hands, just as the first police cruiser turned into the driveway, its spotlight sweeping across the house. Naomi slammed the car into reverse. The tires spun wildly before gaining traction. She whipped the sedan backward onto the street, narrowly avoiding the second approaching police car. We sped off into the whiteout conditions of the Chicago blizzard, leaving the flashing police lights far behind us. The intense heat of the car's climate control washed over me, thawing my frozen limbs. The babies, feeling the sudden warmth, quieted down into soft, exhausted whimpers. I slumped back against the leather seat, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs. I looked at Naomi through the rearview mirror. Her face was set in a tight, determined expression, her eyes constantly checking our surroundings to ensure we were not being followed. How did you know I was out there? I finally asked, my voice barely above a hoarse whisper. Naomi kept her eyes glued to the treacherous road. Gavin got a text from Derek boasting about the eviction plan earlier this evening, she explained. Derek found it hilarious. He bragged that he completely blindsided you, disabled the vehicles, and called the police to finish the job. Gavin just laughed it off, but I knew I had to intervene. I grabbed my keys the second Gavin went to take a shower. I stared at her, overwhelmed by the sudden, unexpected rescue. You risked a lot coming here tonight, I said. If Derek finds out you helped me, he will turn the entire family against you and Gavin. Naomi let out a harsh laugh. Let them try, she stated fiercely. Audrey, we both know how toxic that family truly is. I have been sitting at their pristine dinner tables for years, smiling politely while Martha subjected me to relentless covert racism and endless microaggressions. She makes passive-aggressive comments about my hair background and career, always wrapping her insults in sweet Southern charm. They tolerate me because Gavin makes good money, but they have never once considered me family. They treat you exactly the same way, punishing you simply because you do not fit their elitist superficial mold. She navigated a sharp turn, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. I have stayed quiet to keep the peace for Gavin's sake. Naomi continued, her voice growing sharper with every word. But they think because I am quiet, I am blind. They severely underestimate me. I am a forensic auditor for a major corporate firm, Audrey. My entire career is built on finding things that wealthy, arrogant people try to hide. I leaned forward, my military instincts instantly analyzing the shift in her tone. What exactly did you find? I asked. Naomi glanced at me in the rearview mirror, her expression dead serious. Derek is not half the financial genius he pretends to be, she revealed. Over the past few months, I noticed he was bringing home physical documents he should never have possessed outside his secure office. He left his briefcase unlocked one evening, and my professional curiosity got the better of me. I took a quick look. Derek is hiding something massive at the fund, and Camilla is helping him cover his tracks. The promotion he got today is not a reward for his hard work. It is a calculated move to position him perfectly as the primary scapegoat when their illegal operation eventually crashes down. The pieces of the puzzle began to snap together in my mind. The sudden divorce, the brutal eviction, the desperate attempt to paint me as an unstable threat to the children. Derek and Camilla were not just cruel. They were incredibly vulnerable. They needed to eliminate any potential liabilities, and a trained military cyber officer living under the same roof was a massive liability. We drove in silence for a few minutes while I processed the magnitude of her revelation. Where are we going now? I asked, checking the twin carriers to ensure my babies were still sleeping soundly in the warmth. Naomi turned the sedan onto a dark road heading toward the industrial outskirts of the city. I am taking you to a place they will never think to look, she promised. But Audrey, you need to understand something. Derek is going to use every dirty trick and every dollar at his disposal to destroy you completely in family court. He wants full custody just to ensure you do not get a single dime of child support. I looked down at my sleeping premature twins, feeling fierce fire ignite in my chest. They chose the wrong woman to ambush, I replied. I will not just survive this, I will dismantle their entire operation piece by piece. Naomi drove us away from the affluent neighborhoods and deep into the industrial outskirts of Chicago, where the city lights faded into harsh, flickering street lamps. The snowfall finally began to slow, leaving the roads slick and dangerous. We pulled into the parking lot of a discreet, cheap motel. The neon sign buzzed erratically above the entrance, casting a sickly red glow over the snowbanks. It was the kind of place that asked no questions and demanded payment up front, perfect for staying entirely off the radar. Naomi parked near the back entrance, killing the headlights immediately. I carefully unbuckled the infant carriers, ensuring my premature twins remained warmly swaddled against the freezing air. Their tiny chests rose and fell in steady rhythm, oblivious to the fact that their world had just been upended. I stepped out of the sedan, bracing against the frigid wind, and hurried toward the dim lobby. Naomi followed closely behind me, checking our surroundings to make sure nobody had trailed us from the house. I approached the front desk where a bored clerk chewed gum and barely glanced up from a portable television. I asked for a room for a week, planning to secure a temporary base of operations while I formulated my counterattack against my husband. The clerk typed lazily on his keyboard and quoted a price that was surprisingly high for the rundown establishment, but I did not have the luxury of negotiating. I reached into my wallet and pulled out my primary debit card, sliding it across the scratched laminate counter. The clerk swiped it through the ancient machine. The machine beeped an unpleasant tone. Declined, he stated flatly, handing the card back. Try another one. I frowned, feeling a sudden icy knot form in my stomach. That account held the bulk of my liquid assets money I had meticulously saved over years of grueling overseas military deployments. It should have held more than enough to cover a week at a cheap motel. I pulled out my backup credit card, handing it over with a forced smile. The clerk swiped it again. Another sharp beep echoed in the quiet lobby. Declined again, he said, his tone shifting from bored to annoyed. You got cash or what? The knot in my stomach tightened into a hard ball of pure dread. My military training had taught me to immediately assess and adapt to sudden threats, but the panic of being penniless with two fragile newborns threatened to overwhelm my composure. I stepped away from the counter and pulled out my smartphone. My fingers felt stiff and clumsy as I quickly opened my mobile banking application. The loading screen seemed to mock me, spinning endlessly before finally revealing my dashboard. I stared at the numbers on the screen, my breath catching in my throat. My joint savings account, the account I had exclusively funded with $50,000 of hazard pay and deployment bonuses, showed a balance of exactly $0.00. I rapidly tapped into the transaction history, searching for an explanation. There it was, stamped in glaring digital ink. At exactly 8 this morning, while I was sitting in the intensive care unit, receiving my discharge papers, and preparing to bring our babies home, Derek had executed a massive wire transfer. He had wiped out every single penny, moving the entire $50,000 into an untraceable offshore account under Camilla's corporate umbrella. This was not a random act of spite. It was a highly calculated move of severe financial abuse. Derek knew I would need immediate funds to survive the brutal winter night with two premature infants. He deliberately starved me out, hoping to force me into surrendering my parental rights just to keep my children from freezing on the streets of Chicago. I stood perfectly still in the motel lobby, gripping my phone tightly. The sheer cruelty of his actions solidified my resolve. I turned back toward Naomi, who had been watching the exchange with knowing eyes. She stepped forward, reaching deep into her heavy wool coat. Before the impatient clerk could tell us to leave, Naomi placed a thick white envelope onto the counter. I will cover the week, she told the clerk, her voice carrying a commanding edge that demanded immediate compliance. She turned to me and handed over the remainder of the envelope. It is $1,000 in emergency cash, she explained softly so the clerk could not hear. I withdrew it from a separate account Gavin knows absolutely nothing about. Use it to buy food formula and whatever the twins need for the next few days. I took the envelope, feeling an immense wave of gratitude for my sister-in-law. You did not have to do this, I whispered, pulling her into a quick hug. You have already risked your own safety just bringing us here. Naomi pulled back, reaching into her pocket one final time. She produced a small, sleek black USB flash drive and pressed it firmly into my hand. This is why I really came for you, Audrey, she stated, her dark eyes flashing with intense determination. I managed to scrape some audit logs directly from Camilla's fund. I copied everything I could before their security protocols locked me out. The data on this drive proves that Derek and Camilla are orchestrating a massive financial fraud, but the encryption is beyond my clearance level as an auditor. Naomi looked down at the twin carriers, then back up at me. I need a cyber expert, she said. I need someone who understands how to tear down military-grade firewalls and trace ghost accounts. I need you to break this wide open and burn their entire empire to the ground. I gripped the USB drive, feeling the cold metal against my skin. The fear of being broke and homeless vanished instantly, replaced by the sharp, analytical focus of an Army Cyber Command officer given a clear mission. I looked at Naomi and nodded. Naomi did not linger. She gave my shoulder one last firm squeeze, turned, and disappeared back into the howling Chicago winter. The heavy motel door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the cramped, poorly lit room, with my two sleeping infants and a digital bomb resting in the palm of my hand. I immediately engaged the deadbolt and flipped the rusted chain lock into place. The room smelled faintly of stale smoke and harsh chemical cleaners, a stark contrast to the sterile environment of the intensive care unit I had just left. I carefully moved the infant carriers onto the center of the sagging queen-sized bed, arranging pillows around them to create a secure temporary barricade. I then pulled the thick blackout curtains tightly shut, sealing us off from the outside world. Sleep was entirely out of the question. My military training overrode my physical exhaustion. I retrieved my tactical backpack from the floor, unzipping the reinforced main compartment. I pulled out my issued, military-grade laptop. The heavy matte black machine was built to withstand combat zones and process massive datasets simultaneously. I booted it up the screen, casting a harsh, pale blue light across the dark room. I plugged Naomi's encrypted flash drive into the secure port. The system immediately threw up a warning prompt detecting military-level encryption firewalls surrounding Camilla's offshore investment data. I cracked my knuckles, letting muscle memory take over. I began running a series of complex diagnostic scripts probing the digital perimeter for any weaknesses. Morning arrived hours later, bleeding gray light through the edges of the curtains. The twins stirred, letting out soft cries demanding their morning feeding. I temporarily stepped away from the scrolling lines of code to prepare their bottles, using the emergency cache Naomi had provided. I had just finished burping the second baby and placing them safely back into their carriers when a sudden violently loud pounding at the door shattered the quiet of the room. The aggressive noise made the babies flinch and start wailing anew. My heart hammered against my ribs. I swiftly slammed the laptop shut, securing the flash drive back inside my pocket. I approached the door, looking through the scratched peephole. Standing on the exterior walkway were two individuals. One was a woman in a sharp gray suit clutching a thick folder. Standing slightly behind her was a uniformed Chicago police officer, with his hand resting cautiously near his utility belt. I unlocked the door, opening it just wide enough to speak, keeping my body blocking their view of the interior. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice utterly devoid of emotion. The woman stepped forward, her expression severe and uncompromising. "Are you Audrey?" she demanded. "I am an investigator with Child Protective Services. We are conducting an emergency welfare check accompanied by law enforcement. We received a highly concerning report regarding the safety of two premature infants currently in your care." I felt a cold surge of adrenaline spike through my veins. A report from whom, I asked, though I already knew the answer perfectly well. "From your husband Derek," the investigator stated, pushing the door open wider, forcing me to step back into the room. The police officer followed her inside, his eyes immediately scanning the dingy motel surroundings. "Derek filed an emergency ex parte petition for sole custody early this morning. He contacted our office in complete distress." She slowly opened her thick folder and pulled out a freshly printed legal document. "Your husband claims you are an unstable, highly dangerous military veteran, suffering from violent, untreated post-traumatic stress disorder episodes. He reported that you became aggressively erratic yesterday evening upon being discharged from the hospital, resulting in you kidnapping the newborn twins and fleeing the family home into a severe blizzard." I stared at her, my mind racing as I processed the sheer magnitude of his psychological warfare. Derek was weaponizing my military service against me. He was using the very institution meant to protect vulnerable children as a tool to execute his personal vengeance. He wanted to strip me of everything, leaving me with absolutely nothing left to fight with. The investigator continued reading from the heavily fabricated report, her tone dripping with bureaucratic judgment. "The father claims you have a history of severe mental instability and are currently experiencing a complete psychotic break. He emphasized that you have absolutely zero financial resources to provide basic necessities for premature infants with compromised immune systems. He specifically cited your current homeless status and the fact that you have resorted to hiding in a cheap, unsanitary motel as definitive proof of your profound unfitness to function as a mother. I looked around the small, depressing room. The violently peeling wallpaper, the deeply stained carpet, the makeshift barricade of pillows surrounding the babies. To an untrained outside observer walking into this scene, Derek's malicious narrative looked entirely plausible. He had meticulously orchestrated this exact scenario. He had drained my bank accounts, so my cards would decline, forcing me into this substandard housing. He had locked me out in the freezing cold, so I would have no choice but to flee. He had engineered my complete financial and social ruin, and now he was directing state authorities to inspect the wreckage he had personally created. The tall police officer stepped closer to the sagging bed, shining his heavy tactical flashlight toward the crying babies in their carriers. The investigator followed his gaze, her expression hardening into absolute resolve. She closed the folder and looked me directly in the eyes. Her posture was rigid, offering no room for debate or negotiation. The cruel trap Derek had set was finally springing shut. The investigator reached into her dark leather bag, slowly pulled out a metal clipboard, and decisively clicked her black pen. She took a deep breath, fully convinced she was rescuing victims from a monster. "Ma'am, we have a mandate to place these children in emergency foster care immediately. Ma'am, we have a mandate to place these children in emergency foster care immediately." The words hung in the stale motel air. Most mothers would have broken down. Most women would have screamed, cried, or begged on their knees to keep their newborn babies. Derek was banking on that exact hysterical reaction to validate his fabricated narrative. He wanted me to look unhinged in front of the authorities. I did not cry. Instead of panic, a profound, icy calm washed over me. Years of intensive military training forged in high-pressure cyber command bunkers instantly took over. Emotion was a vulnerability. Data was a weapon. I stepped back, smoothing my posture into a rigid, commanding stance. I gestured toward the small, scarred wooden table near the window. "I understand you are simply doing your job," I said, keeping my voice completely level and authoritative. "However, before you take any steps to remove my children, you need to review the actual facts. Please have a seat. I have comprehensive documentation that will prove every single allegation my husband made is a malicious, calculated lie." The Child Protective Services investigator blinked, clearly caught off guard by my absolute composure. She exchanged a quick, uncertain glance with the police officer. Slowly, she stepped away from the bed and approached the table. I moved to my military-grade laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the initial security layers I had set up earlier. I brought up my secure digital archives. I turned the bright screen toward the investigator. "Let us address the claim of my supposed violent mental instability first," I stated. "These are my official, unredacted discharge papers from the Veterans Affairs Hospital finalized yesterday morning. Right below that you will find my complete psychological evaluations conducted by the Military Medical Board over the past 5 years. The investigator leaned in, her eyes scanning the official government seals and medical signatures. As you can clearly read, I continued, my voice steady. I have 0 markers for post-traumatic stress disorder. I have never had a psychotic break. My discharge was strictly a medical necessity due to a high-risk twin pregnancy, not psychological unfitness. My service record is immaculate." The investigator swallowed hard, her severe expression beginning to crack. She scrolled through the files, finding nothing but exemplary commendations and perfect mental health clearances. The police officer leaned over her shoulder, reading the official documents. "Now let us address the claim of homelessness and child endangerment," I said, opening a new window on the screen. "Derek told you I am a danger to our children because I lack financial resources. He deliberately omitted how that happened. I pulled up the secure banking logs. The screen displayed the glaring red transaction history. I pointed to the specific line item. At exactly 8 o'clock yesterday morning, while I was sitting in the intensive care unit holding those babies, Derek maliciously executed an unauthorized wire transfer. He drained $50,000 of my personal military savings into an offshore corporate shell account. He completely wiped out my life savings. The investigator stared at the timestamp. Her face went pale as the reality of the situation began to dawn on her. He then went to the house. I continued matching the timeline with the digital evidence, changed the electronic locks on my vehicle, disabled my access to the home I purchased with my military loan, and physically locked me out in a -5-degree blizzard. I did not kidnap my children. I evacuated them from a financially and emotionally abusive environment. What my husband did constitutes severe financial abuse and deliberate child endangerment under federal law. The room fell completely silent save for the soft breathing of the twins on the bed. The transformation in the investigator was profound. The authoritative judgmental posture vanished entirely, replaced by absolute horror and professional outrage. She realized she had been weaponized by an abuser to inflict further harm on a victim. "Do you have a printer here?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed anger. "I need hard copies of all these logs immediately." I reached into my tactical backpack and retrieved a compact, portable wireless printer. Within moments, the machine was humming, producing crisp physical copies of the medical records, the psychological evaluations, and the damning banking transactions. I handed the stack of warm papers directly to her. The police officer looked at me with newfound respect. "Ma'am," he said, his hand moving away from his belt, "what your husband did is reprehensible. If you want to file a formal report against him for the theft and the endangerment, I will take your statement right now." "I will handle Derek through proper federal channels soon enough," I replied coldly. "Right now, my priority is ensuring he cannot use the state to terrorize my children again." The investigator rapidly filled out a new form on her clipboard, crossing out sections of the original report with forceful, angry strokes of her pen. "I am flagging Derek's file in our central database for malicious reporting and severe child endangerment," she declared firmly. "He tried to use this agency to facilitate abuse. We do not take that lightly. Instead of taking your children, I am requesting an immediate emergency protective order against your husband." She handed me a temporary document. "This order goes into effect on the spot," she explained. "He cannot come within 500 feet of you or the twins. He cannot contact you. If he tries, this officer will arrest him immediately. You and your babies are safe." I firmly took the protective order, the paper feeling incredibly heavy with a hard-won, necessary victory. I had survived his cruel ambush. The system Derek tried to use against me had just become my shield. As the authorities left the motel room, I locked the door and turned back to my encrypted laptop. My defensive maneuvers were complete. Now it was time to go on the offensive. I sat back down at the small wooden table and pulled the encrypted flash drive from my pocket. The black metal felt heavy with dangerous potential. I plugged it directly into the secure port of my military laptop. The screen instantly flashed a severe crimson warning. Camilla's investment fund utilized enterprise-grade security protocols. They relied on AES 256-bit encryption layered behind a rotating firewall system, designed to lock out standard corporate spies. To an average hacker, this drive was a solid brick of useless data. To an Army Cyber Command officer who spent years dismantling hostile foreign networks, it was just a puzzle waiting to be solved. I launched a custom decryption algorithm I had coded during my last deployment. My fingers hammered the keyboard in a relentless rhythm, injecting a string of brute force commands to overwhelm the primary security gate. The cooling fan of my laptop whirred loudly, protesting the massive computational strain. I bypassed the initial authentication protocol within seconds, but Camilla had installed a secondary biometric trap. If I failed to input the correct keystroke sequence, the drive would execute an automatic wipe, erasing every shred of evidence Naomi had risked her life to steal. I closed my eyes, visualizing the digital architecture. I isolated the trigger command and routed it into an endless sandbox loop. The screen blinked green. Access granted. I exhaled a sharp breath. The heavily guarded vault of Camilla's elite Chicago investment fund lay completely open before me. I organized the chaotic data dump into readable spreadsheets. Naomi had managed to scrape a gold mine of raw transaction logs, private server communications, and hidden ledger entries. I started running data correlation scripts cross-referencing the outgoing capital with the internal project reports. It did not take long to see the massive discrepancies. The numbers were not just slightly off, they were catastrophically manipulated. The deeper I dug into the encrypted files, the more the sheer scale of the financial devastation revealed itself. Camilla and Derek were not brilliant financial strategists. They were orchestrating a colossal, highly sophisticated money laundering operation right under the noses of federal regulators. I tracked the flow of cash moving through the system. They were targeting high-profile investors, wealthy individuals, private equity groups, and massive institutional funds. Derek was taking their multi-million-dollar investments and creating completely fabricated loss reports. He would document that a high-risk venture had failed, citing unpredictable market volatility to mask the missing capital. In reality, the money never went into those ventures. Instead, Derek and Camilla were siphoning the funds into a complex web of dummy corporations. I traced the digital signatures of these shell companies. They were registered in tax havens across the globe from the Cayman Islands to Cyprus. Once the money hit those untraceable offshore accounts, Camilla would wash the stolen assets through legitimate real estate holdings and luxury asset purchases. They were bleeding their clients dry and pocketing the enormous profits. The sheer audacity was staggering. My husband, the man who complained about the cost of prenatal vitamins for his own unborn children, was casually moving tens of millions of stolen dollars across international borders every single week. He used his slick corporate charm to sell devastating lies to trusting clients, while Camilla provided the executive cover needed to bypass internal compliance audits. They believed their encrypted system was invincible. They thought their wealth and status made them untouchable. They had no idea they had just handed the complete blueprint of their criminal enterprise to a highly trained cyber warfare specialist. I highlighted the routing numbers, saving every piece of incriminating data into an offline encrypted vault. I needed to ensure this evidence was completely indestructible. As I organized the final batch of stolen internal communications, a specific hidden folder caught my eye. It was labeled with a simple alphanumeric code and buried beneath a mountain of mundane human resources files. I decrypted the folder and opened the sole document inside. It was a private, highly classified memorandum drafted by Camilla just 3 days ago, addressed to her offshore legal counsel. The subject line read, "Senior Partner Succession and Liability Transfer." I read the cold, calculating words, and a bitter, knowing smile spread across my face. Derek had strutted around my living room yesterday, puffing out his chest, bragging that Camilla had promoted him to senior partner because he was a financial king. He threw his family into the snow because he believed he had finally reached the absolute pinnacle of corporate power. The memo told a completely different story. Camilla detailed her explicit exit strategy. She knew federal regulators were beginning to circle the fund. The Securities and Exchange Commission had recently flagged a minor anomaly in one of their subsidiary accounts. Camilla was preparing to cut and run, but she needed someone to take the devastating fall. The senior partner promotion was never a reward for Derek's financial genius. It was a carefully engineered legal trap. By elevating him to that specific title, Camilla successfully transferred the primary fiduciary liability directly onto his shoulders. The promotion paperwork Derek so proudly signed contained hidden clauses making him solely responsible for the very portfolios they had been draining. Camilla was setting him up to be the ultimate fall guy. When the federal authorities inevitably raided the Chicago office, all the fabricated digital trails and forged signatures would point directly and exclusively to Derek. Camilla would vanish to an extradition-free country, with her billions leaving Derek to face decades in a federal penitentiary. He traded his wife and newborn children for a VIP ticket to federal prison. The sheer poetic justice of his imminent downfall washed over me. He had mercilessly abandoned his own flesh and blood to chase after glittering corporate prestige, completely blind to the enormous butcher knife hanging directly above his arrogant head. I sat back and stared at the glowing monitor, fully realizing my counterattack was now armed. I sat back and stared at the glowing monitor, fully realizing my counterattack was now armed. But my instincts warned me that the rabbit hole went much deeper. I had seen the scale of their greed, and greed of that magnitude rarely spared those closest to the perpetrators. I began running a new cross-referencing script, inputting my own personal identification numbers, social security details, and asset records against the massive database of shell companies and fraudulent offshore accounts I had just decrypted. The search algorithm churned through millions of lines of code. For several agonizing minutes, the screen remained a blur of rapidly scrolling text. Then a single red alert flashed across the center of the display. A direct match had been found. My heart slammed against my ribs as I clicked the highlighted file. The document was a detailed asset ledger connected to one of Camilla's primary offshore holding corporations. I scrolled down the page and felt a sudden sickening wave of nausea wash over me. There, listed as a recently acquired collateral asset, was the deed to my beautiful Beacon Hill-style home. I stared at the property details in absolute disbelief. I had purchased that house entirely on my own, using my hard-earned military benefits and a strict Veterans Affairs loan. It was legally my property, secured long before Derek and I even merged our finances. There was absolutely no legal way that house should be linked to an offshore corporate account. I dug fiercely into the attached PDF files, pulling up the digital scans of the loan origination documents. The paperwork detailed a massive high-interest commercial loan, a desperate influx of cash meant to cover a catastrophic margin call Derek had suffered a few weeks prior. To secure this massive loan, the bank required high-value physical collateral. I zoomed in on the final page of the contract, my eyes immediately locking onto the signature line. Someone had signed my name. I analyzed the looping cursive script. It was a remarkably good forgery, but it was not mine. The sharp angle of the letter A and the heavy pressure on the ending loop belonged to only one person: Martha. My mother-in-law had boldly forged my signature on federal loan documents. I quickly checked the digital timestamp on the electronic notary seal. The documents were finalized exactly 4 days ago. 4 days ago, I was lying unconscious in the intensive care unit at the military hospital, fighting a severe infection after giving birth to my premature twins. While I was bleeding and hooked up to life support machines, Martha had calmly walked into a shady notary office with Derek and stolen my house. They used my hard-earned sanctuary as collateral to secure a fraudulent corporate loan, funneling the cash directly into Derek's failing offshore accounts. They stole the roof right over my head while I was fighting for my life. The horror did not stop there. I pulled up the current status of the loan with the commercial bank. Because the funds had been immediately siphoned offshore and no initial payment had been made, the loan was already in default. My beautiful home, the safe haven I had bled for during overseas deployments, was secretly sitting in pre-foreclosure. Derek and Martha knew the bank was going to seize the property within a matter of days. That was the real reason they threw me out into the freezing blizzard. They needed me off the premises before the bank inspectors arrived to change the locks. They wanted me destitute, homeless, and entirely unaware that my credit and my property had been completely destroyed by their staggering criminality. A cold, hard fury replaced my initial shock. I saved the forged mortgage documents and the notary logs into my encrypted vault. I then pivoted my attention back to the overarching structure of Camilla and Derek's fraudulent enterprise. I needed to understand exactly who they were stealing from to generate these massive margins. I initiated a deep dive trace on the primary incoming capital streams, tracking the source of the millions of dollars flowing into their initial holding fund before being washed offshore. The data unraveled quickly under my targeted decryption tools. I identified a dozen high net worth individuals and several private hedge funds. But it was the largest institutional investor on their roster that made me stop breathing completely. I highlighted the corporate identification number of their biggest victim and ran it through a federal registry database. The result populated instantly, displaying a familiar authoritative seal. Camilla and Derek were not just scamming greedy corporate billionaires. Their primary victim was a massive Department of Defense military pension fund. They were actively draining the retirement savings of thousands of disabled veterans, active duty service members, and grieving military families. They were stealing from my brothers and sisters in arms to fund their lavish Chicago lifestyles, their designer suits, and their expensive champagne. I leaned back in the cheap motel chair, the pale blue light of the screen illuminating my face. A slow, dangerous smile curved the corners of my mouth. If Derek and Camilla had only stolen from private corporate investors, this would have been a standard white-collar crime investigation handled by slow-moving financial regulators. But they had crossed a sacred line. They had directly targeted a federal military pension fund. By stealing from the Department of Defense, they had unwittingly elevated their miserable little fraud scheme into a matter of profound national security. They thought they were untouchable financial elites, completely oblivious to the fact that they had just declared war on the most powerful military apparatus on the planet. I reached for my encrypted phone, knowing exactly who to call. They had messed with the wrong veteran, and they had definitely messed with the wrong sector. My counterattack was no longer just about family revenge. It was about absolute annihilation. I pulled a burner phone from the bottom of my tactical backpack, a device I kept specifically for absolute emergencies. I booted it up and bypassed the standard carrier network, linking it directly to a secure, untraceable satellite tunnel I had established during my active duty days. I dialed a highly classified internal number, a direct line to my former commanding officer at the Department of Defense, General Thomas Thorne. The line clicked open instantly after half a ring. "State your authorization," a gruff, familiar voice commanded. "Echo actual authorization." "Cipher 9. Bravo. 7 Tango," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of fear. There was a heavy pause on the other end of the encrypted connection. Audrey General Thorne said, his tone softening just a fraction before returning to strict military professionalism. "You have been off the grid. What is your status?" "General, I need to initiate a secure Level 1 data transfer immediately," I stated, keeping my eyes locked on the glowing monitor of my laptop. "I have just intercepted massive, irrefutable evidence of a highly sophisticated financial fraud operation. The primary target of this operation is the military pension fund. They are actively siphoning tens of millions of dollars from disabled veterans and active duty personnel into offshore shell accounts based in the Cayman Islands." The silence on the line grew incredibly dense. When General Thorne spoke again, his voice was forged from cold steel. "Are you absolutely certain about this intelligence, Audrey?" "I have the raw audit logs, the bank routing numbers, and the encrypted internal communications from the vice president of the offending investment firm," I confirmed. "I am preparing to transmit the entire data package to your secure server right now. I need you to initiate a joint federal task force immediately. Send the package," the general ordered. "I am locking down the receiving server." I turned my attention back to my laptop. I highlighted the massive folder containing all the decrypted files, the forged mortgage documents, the shell company ledgers, and Camilla's damning exit strategy memo. I initiated the secure file transfer protocol. A thick, green progress bar appeared in the center of my screen, calculating the immense size of the data dump. "Transfer initiating," I told the general. The progress bar began to slowly creep across the screen. 10%, 20%. The file was massive, containing thousands of individual transaction records. I glanced nervously at the twin infant carriers resting on the sagging motel bed. The babies were still sleeping soundly, completely unaware of the digital warfare happening just feet away. 40%, 50%. I watched the numbers climb, my heart hammering a steady, relentless rhythm against my ribs. I knew Camilla would eventually realize Naomi had breached her system. Wealthy criminals always had monitoring software watching their digital vaults. It was only a matter of time before they tracked the stolen data back to this exact location. 70%, 80%. We are receiving the first packets now, General Thorne announced over the secure line. Stand by, Audrey. Keep the connection open until we confirm full receipt. 90%, 95%. The green bar was agonizingly close to the edge of the transfer window. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the wooden table. 98%, 99%. Without a single second of warning, the thick glass of the motel room window exploded inward. A shower of jagged, glittering shards sprayed violently across the stained carpet. I instinctively threw my arms up to shield my face from the flying debris. Simultaneously, a massive, deafening crash echoed through the small space. The heavy wooden door of the motel room was brutally kicked completely off its hinges. The metal deadbolt ripped straight through the cheap door frame, sending splintered wood flying into the room. The door slammed violently onto the floor, allowing the freezing Chicago wind to immediately howl inside. Two massive men wearing sharp, dark suits stormed into the room. They moved with terrifying speed and lethal purpose. These were not random street thugs. They were highly trained corporate fixers, ruthless mercenaries hired by Camilla to track down Naomi's leaked audit logs and eliminate the threat by any means necessary. The first man, a hulking figure with a scarred jawline, immediately locked his eyes on my glowing laptop screen. He lunged forward rapidly, closing the distance between the broken door and my table in two massive strides. "Grab the drive and smash the machine," the second man ordered, stepping quickly into the room and blocking the only exit. "Do not let her complete that upload." The first man reached aggressively across the table, his thick hands swiping violently toward the encrypted USB flash drive protruding from the side of my computer. I reacted instantly, slamming the laptop lid down on his outstretched fingers to protect the transfer process. He grunted in pain, but quickly recovered, throwing a heavy punch aimed directly at my head. I ducked sharply, feeling the rush of air as his fist grazed my hair. "Where are the original files?" the second man yelled, pulling a heavy metallic baton from inside his tailored jacket. "Hand over the data right now, or you are not walking out of this cheap motel alive." I backed away from the table, positioning myself carefully between the two mercenaries and the bed. My mind raced, calculating distances, identifying structural weaknesses in my opponents, and searching for any improvised weapons in the cramped space. I had to protect the laptop for just a few more seconds to ensure the transfer reached 100%. The second man, realizing I was physically blocking his path to the bed, suddenly shifted his gaze. His cold eyes landed directly on the twin infant carriers resting among the pillows. A sinister, predatory smile crept slowly across his face. He clearly recognized exactly what I was guarding. "Well, now," he sneered, tapping the heavy baton against his palm. "It looks like we have a massive problem." He took a deliberate step toward the bed. The threat against my children flipped a switch deep inside my brain. The protective mother and the trained combat officer merged into a single force of pure violence. I did not scream. I did not issue a warning. I exploded forward. The first man, the hulking fixer who had tried to grab the laptop, was closest. He was heavy, relying on brute strength rather than speed. As he reached out to intercept me, I dropped my center of gravity, slipping entirely under his wide, clumsy grasp. I pivoted sharply on my right heel, driving my left elbow straight upward with every ounce of force I possessed. Bone connected directly with his throat. The sound of crushing cartilage echoed over the howling wind. He collapsed instantly, clutching his neck, his face turning a deep, unnatural shade of purple as he gasped for air on the stained carpet. The second man swung the heavy metallic baton wildly toward my shoulder. My combat training dictated my next move before conscious thought could catch up. I stepped inside the arc of his swing, closing the distance to neutralize the weapon. I grabbed his wrist with both hands, twisting it sharply against the joint. until I heard a loud pop. The baton clattered uselessly to the floor. I grabbed him by the lapels of his expensive tailored suit, using his own forward momentum against him. I drove his face violently downward, smashing his forehead directly into the solid wood edge of the motel desk. The impact was sickeningly loud. He slumped sideways, completely incapacitated, sliding down the wall like a discarded rag doll. I immediately spun back to the laptop. The green progress bar hit the edge of the screen. A sharp, clear chime sounded from the speakers. "Transfer complete," the system announced. General Thorne's voice cut through the secure channel. "We have the package, Audrey. The data is entirely secured on our end. Get out of there immediately. We are tracking your burner phone signal. An extraction team is already moving to your coordinates." I ripped the encrypted USB flash drive from the port and shoved it deep into my tactical backpack. I slammed the laptop shut and threw it in next to the drive. The first thug on the floor began to groan, his hands blindly reaching out, trying to push himself up from the wet carpet. I had zero time to waste. I rushed to the bed. I strapped the twin carriers securely across my chest and back using my heavy winter coat and the durable straps of my tactical gear. The babies whined, disturbed by the sudden movement, but they were safe. I pulled my hood up to shield my face from the glass shards. I did not bother looking back at the two broken mercenaries bleeding on the floor. I stepped onto the broken window frame, kicked the remaining shards of glass away with my heavy boots, and vaulted out the back window. The freezing snow immediately swallowed us. I vanished into the dark, swirling blizzard, leaving Camilla's hired muscle to explain their utter failure to their boss. I pushed through the knee-deep snow behind the motel, using the shadows of the industrial park buildings for cover. My legs burned with exertion, but adrenaline fueled my every step. The wind howled, masking the sound of our escape. For 50 grueling minutes, I navigated the desolate side streets, keeping my burner phone clutched in my hand, waiting for the extraction signal. The babies remained quiet, lulled back to sleep by the rocking motion of my frantic pace. Suddenly, two massive, unmarked black SUVs emerged from the swirling snow. They slid to a synchronized, silent halt right beside me. The doors opened simultaneously. 4 heavily armed federal agents wearing tactical gear stepped out, forming a protective perimeter around me. The lead agent gestured to the open door of the primary vehicle. "Get in, ma'am," he instructed urgently. "You are completely safe now." I climbed into the heated interior, the warmth instantly soothing my frozen muscles. A secure communication screen mounted on the dashboard blinked to life. General Thorne's face appeared, his expression a mix of relief and intense focus. "Excellent work," Audrey, the general stated. "Our analysts have run preliminary checks on the data package you transmitted. The evidence is staggering. Camilla and Derek have breached multiple federal firewalls and stolen directly from the military pension reserves. This is no longer a localized corporate fraud issue. It is a severe national security breach." The convoy sped through the deserted Chicago streets, bypassing regular traffic laws to transport us safely. Within an hour, we pulled into a highly secure subterranean garage belonging to a federal safehouse facility. Armed guards secured every entrance. I was escorted into a pristine, warm living quarters, a massive upgrade from the freezing motel. Medical personnel immediately checked the twins, confirming they were perfectly healthy and completely unharmed by the ordeal. General Thorne was waiting for me in a sterile briefing room down the hall. Beside him stood a sharp, intimidating woman who introduced herself as Director Vance from the Securities and Exchange Commission. The two massive government entities had joined forces the second my data hit their servers. "We have established a joint task force," Director Vance explained, handing me a thick file. "The Department of Defense and the SEC are pooling resources to dismantle Camilla's entire network. However, the financial architecture she and your husband built is heavily encrypted and highly complex. We need an insider who understands their digital footprint." General Thorne stepped forward, holding a silver badge. "We are not just protecting you, Audrey. We are recruiting you. Effective immediately, the Department of Defense is swearing you in as a special consultant to this joint federal task force. You have full clearance to tear their empire down." I took the badge, feeling the cold metal warm against my palm, ready to finish the war Derek started. I took the badge, feeling the cold metal warm against my palm, ready to finish the war Derek started. The Joint Task Force Command Center buzzed with intense energy as analysts pored over the decrypted files. Director Vance pointed to a massive digital map on the wall, detailing the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Cyprus. The federal freezing process is underway, she explained, her tone sharp and clinical. We are locking down their primary financial arteries, but it takes time to secure international warrants. If Camilla and your husband sense even a fraction of this federal scrutiny, they will board a private jet and vanish into a non-extradition country before dawn. We need them entirely oblivious. We need them anchored in Chicago. I looked at the digital map and nodded. They are narcissists, I stated, pacing the length of the sterile briefing room. Narcissists do not run when they feel powerful. They run when they feel threatened. To keep them grounded, we have to feed their massive egos. We have to make them believe they completely destroyed me. I need to play the ultimate victim. General Thorne crossed his arms, raising an eyebrow. What exactly is your tactical approach, Audrey? I pulled out my burner phone and opened a secure messaging application to contact Naomi. She was still operating inside the family circle, perfectly positioned to deliver a payload of misinformation. I explained my strategy to the federal agents. I will send Derek a pathetic, desperate message. He needs to think his financial starvation tactic worked flawlessly. Then Naomi will provide visual confirmation of my absolute defeat. With the task force monitoring the secure line, I drafted a text message directly to Derek. I kept the language deliberately weak, stripping away all my military pride to craft the perfect illusion of a broken woman. Please, Derek, I typed, forcing my fingers to hit the keys. I have absolutely nothing left. My accounts are completely empty. I am working as a waitress at a filthy diner just to buy baby formula for the twins. They are so cold. Please send us something. Anything. I hit send. General Thorne watched the screen, tracking the data packet. Delivered, he confirmed. Now we set the visual trap. A federal agent quickly secured a cheap, grease-stained waitress uniform from a local diner. I slipped into the scratchy polyester dress, tying a stained white apron around my waist. I messed up my hair, pulling it into a sloppy, exhausted bun. I rubbed a thin layer of gray eyeshadow under my eyes to simulate deep, hollow bags of sleep deprivation. I looked exactly like a woman who had been thoroughly crushed by life. I sat in a dimly lit corner of the federal safe house kitchen, holding a cheap plastic tray. Naomi drove to a safe checkpoint nearby, met with a federal liaison, and was escorted into the facility. She took one look at my miserable disguise and smirked. That is an award-winning performance, she said, pulling out her smartphone. She snapped a candid-looking photo of me slumped over the table, staring blankly at a pile of loose change. It looked incredibly authentic. A portrait of absolute misery. Here is the execution plan, Naomi explained, typing rapidly on her screen. I am going to drop this photo into the main family group chat. I will pretend I meant to send it to Gavin privately, acting like I spotted you working at a local dive and snapped a picture to mock you. They will devour it. Naomi hit send on her phone. The image dropped directly into the family group chat. Within 30 seconds, the read receipts lit up. The bait was set. We watched the screen mirror on the command center monitor. The first response came from Martha. The notification pinged loudly in the quiet room. Her message dripped with unadulterated venom. Look at her, Martha wrote, adding a laughing emoji. I always knew she was absolute trash. She belongs in a greasy diner serving coffee. Derek is a king, and kings do not belong with peasants. I told you she was dragging our family name through the mud. Derek chimed in a moment later. His response made my blood run cold, confirming every single suspicion I had about his total lack of humanity. He typed, "She just texted me begging for formula money. I left her on red. Camilla and I are dying of laughter right now. Maybe she can use those waitressing tips to pay a lawyer, assuming she can afford bus fare to the courthouse." A third message popped up, this one from Camilla herself, who had apparently commandeered Derek's phone. Tell the little military dropout to keep the coffee hot. We might stop by in the Mercedes, just to leave her a $1 tip. The federal agents in the room stared at the monitor in complete disgust. Director Vance shook her head. "They are incredibly vicious," she muttered. I looked at the cruel messages and felt a profound sense of peace. I was not angry, I was completely liberated. Their sheer arrogance was cementing their own doom. They were so busy laughing at my fake misery that they failed to notice the federal noose tightening securely around their necks. "We have them," I told General Thorne, stepping out of the stained uniform and putting my tactical gear back on. "They are planning a massive engagement gala for this weekend to announce their fund merger. They will not flee the country. They are too busy gloating to realize their offshore accounts are currently being dismantled piece by piece." General Thorne smiled a hard, tactical grin. "Let them enjoy their party," he said. "The higher they elevate themselves, the harder the impact when we bring the entire structure down. Your deception worked flawlessly, Audrey. They are firmly anchored right here in Chicago, foolishly waiting for the absolute slaughter. Our task force will strike at the very perfect time. Our task force will strike at the very perfect time." The next 48 hours proved General Thorne absolutely right. Drunk on their perceived invincibility, Camilla and Derek moved rapidly to solidify their stolen empire. They sent out digital press releases to every major financial publication in the Midwest. The announcement was ostentatious. Camilla declared a historic merger between her elite investment firm and a subsidiary shell company officially commanded by her brilliant new senior partner Derek. To celebrate this unholy union of stolen assets, they planned a lavish engagement party at the most exclusive hotel ballroom in downtown Chicago. They spared no expense booking a premier catering team, hiring a string quartet, and inviting hundreds of wealthy socialites, clueless investors, and corrupt corporate executives. Most brazenly of all, Camilla arranged for a local financial news network to broadcast the main event live. She wanted the entire city to witness her ultimate triumph. Derek was practically glowing in the promotional photos, wearing a bespoke tuxedo paid for by stolen military pensions. He truly believed he had reached the untouchable apex of high society. He thought he had discarded his previous life without leaving a single trace. The arrogance of their impending public spectacle provided us with the exact operational camouflage we required. General Thorne monitored their digital footprint closely, watching as Camilla arrogantly transferred millions more into vulnerable holding accounts to artificially inflate her fund's liquidity right before the broadcast. She genuinely wanted the financial network cameras to capture a portrait of unprecedented corporate power. Instead, she was painstakingly constructing the absolute perfect conditions for a catastrophic federal seizure. While they spent their days tasting imported caviar and selecting crystal centerpieces, I remained inside the secure federal command center, actively dismantling their entire foundation. My focus shifted to the stolen property. The house I bought with my hard-earned veteran benefits was currently sitting in pre-foreclosure because Martha forged my signature to secure a massive commercial loan. I needed to sever that fraudulent tether immediately. I sat at the briefing table alongside Director Vance and a specialized team of financial investigators from the Securities and Exchange Commission. We traced the forged loan directly to a specific federally backed commercial bank. Because the loan involved wire fraud forgery and the explicit targeting of a disabled military veteran, it triggered a series of severe federal mandates. I picked up the secure line and dialed the direct number to the bank's executive compliance officer, bypassing the standard customer service channels entirely. A crisp voice answered. I identified myself as a special consultant working alongside a Joint Department of Defense and SEC task force. I provided my military clearance codes and immediately transmitted the digital evidence vault. I sent the high-resolution scans of the forged mortgage documents alongside verified exemplars of my actual signature. I included the hospital intensive care unit admission logs, proving I was physically incapacitated and fighting for my life when the fraudulent notary seal was stamped. Director Vance authorized the transmission of the offshore shell company routing numbers, definitively proving the bank had unknowingly facilitated a massive international money laundering operation. The compliance officer fell completely silent as he reviewed the incontrovertible proof populating on his secure monitor. The reality of their massive liability hit him like a freight train. The bank had inadvertently approved a fraudulent high-risk loan secured via identity theft against a protected veteran, funneling the cash into illegal offshore accounts currently under active federal investigation. The compliance officer panicked, assuring me the bank would cooperate fully with the federal authorities to avoid criminal prosecution for facilitating the fraud. Under the direct supervision of the SEC, the bank instantly nullified the entire fraudulent loan. They wiped the massive debt completely off their ledgers, eating the catastrophic loss to avoid federal sanctions. They stripped Derek and Martha of any legal claim to the property. Within a matter of hours, the pre-foreclosure status was entirely reversed and officially erased from the public record. I legally regained absolute unencumbered ownership of my home. The title was restored firmly to my name, free and clear of the toxic debt they had tried to bury me under. I sat in the command center, my eyes locked on the expanding web of their criminal network. The Securities and Exchange Commission agents systematically verified every single fraudulent transaction Derek had authorized under his new title as senior partner. The legal trap Camilla designed to make him the fall guy was remarkably thorough, completely isolating him from any plausible deniability. I felt absolutely no pity for him. He had traded the safety of his newborn twins and the loyalty of a dedicated wife for this poisoned chalice. He had walked away from his family to play kingmaker, eagerly assuming a throne built entirely on lies, theft, and forgery. I instructed the compliance officer and the federal team to place a strict gag order on the entire transaction. Derek and Martha could not know the loan had been federally nullified. They needed to continue believing the bank was days away from seizing the property and changing the locks. They needed to walk into their lavish engagement gala absolutely convinced they had successfully rendered me homeless and destitute. The federal agents secured the documentation in an airtight digital vault, preparing to use the forgery evidence as a primary weapon during the impending arrests. The trap was set perfectly. Camilla and Derek were polishing their champagne flutes, completely blind to the fact that their entire financial empire had been hollowed out from the inside. The federal task force finalized the arrest warrants, printing out thick stacks of undeniable evidence. We synchronized our tactical approach with the scheduled timing of the live television broadcast. They were expecting a glorious celebration of their wealth. We were bringing them total, inescapable destruction. Everything was perfectly aligned for the ultimate execution of absolute justice. Their fragile house of cards was about to collapse entirely on live television. Tonight. Tonight. The word hung in the command center, heavy with impending retribution. Before the federal raid commenced, Derek decided to deliberately twist the knife one final time, completely unaware he was handing us the perfect operational opening. Early that afternoon, a federal liaison stationed outside the rundown diner Naomi had utilized for our staged photograph intercepted a high-end corporate courier. The messenger was explicitly instructed to hand-deliver a secured package directly to the desperate homeless veteran working the morning shift. The liaison flashed a badge, confiscated the gold-embossed envelope, and brought it directly to our secure safe house. I sat at the briefing table alongside General Thorne and the lead federal investigator as the liaison handed me the thick envelope. I quickly broke the heavy wax seal bearing Camilla and Derek's new financial logo. A crisp, brand-new $200 bill fluttered out, landing next to a formal invitation to the Elite Engagement Gala. Clipped securely to the glossy cardstock was a handwritten note on expensive custom stationery. I recognized Derek's arrogant, sprawling handwriting immediately. I read the incredibly cruel words aloud to the room full of highly trained federal agents. It said, "Come serve drinks at my party tonight. Use the dirty service entrance located in the back alley. If you can manage not to drop any champagne flutes, I will pay you enough cash to feed those crying brats for an entire week. Do not wear those ugly military boots." A heavy, profound silence fell over the briefing room. The seasoned federal agent stared at the note in absolute disgust. General Thorne crossed his arms, his jaw clenched so tightly a prominent muscle ticked in his cheek. The sheer malice required to send such a degrading message to the mother of your newborn premature infants was staggering. Derek wanted to parade his new billionaire lifestyle right in front of my face, forcing me to serve him and his wealthy guests while treating me like absolute garbage. He needed to witness my total public humiliation to make his fraudulent triumph feel complete. He believed he held the absolute power of life and death over me and my children. I did not feel angry. I felt an overwhelming sense of clinical tactical precision. His malicious invitation was the final piece of our operational puzzle. It provided me with guaranteed, unquestionable access straight into the heart of their highly secure event. I slowly picked up my untraceable burner phone, the one specifically connected to his personal number. To keep him entirely blind, arrogant, and perfectly positioned for the impending ambush, I had to feed his massive ego one last time. I typed my response carefully, deliberately stripping away all of my dignity to craft the perfect illusion of a thoroughly broken, defeated woman. I wrote, "Thank you, Derek. I really need the money. I will be there." I hit send without hesitation. We watched the secure monitor actively tracking his phone activity. The read receipt appeared almost instantly. A moment later, Naomi forwarded a new screenshot from the private family group chat directly to my secure line. Derek had immediately posted a screenshot of my pathetic reply for Martha and Camilla to brutally mock. Martha responded with a laughing face, typing that I finally knew my proper place at the absolute bottom of the food chain. They were completely disarmed, eagerly anticipating my total public degradation. They had swallowed the bait whole. With the deception perfectly executed, the atmosphere inside the federal safe house shifted dramatically from strategic planning to rapid tactical deployment. The room buzzed with intense, highly focused energy. Federal agents in heavy tactical gear began checking communication lines and synchronizing their secure earpieces. The lead investigator brought a thick stack of finalized arrest warrants to the table. I watched closely as the federal magistrate digital signature was officially stamped onto the documents, legally authorizing the immediate seizure of all offshore assets and the physical detention of both Derek and Camilla for massive corporate fraud and international money laundering. The trap was officially primed. It was time for me to get ready. I walked into the adjoining private quarters where my belongings were securely kept. The greasy-stained polyester waitress uniform from the staged photograph sat neatly folded on the edge of the bed. It represented everything Derek desperately wanted me to be: a helpless, broken casualty of his ruthless ambition. I picked up the cheap, scratchy fabric, walked directly over to the trash can, and dropped it straight into the garbage. I was not going to serve them champagne. I was going to serve them absolute justice. I reached into the heavy garment bag I had specifically requested from my secure storage locker. I pulled out my sharpest, most commanding power suit. It was a flawless, tailored piece, heavily inspired by my military dress uniform, cut from deep navy blue wool, with sharp, authoritative shoulders, and pristine gold buttons running down the front. I slipped into the suit, feeling the rigid structure and intense discipline it demanded. I pinned my hair back into a tight, flawless regulation bun, leaving absolutely zero room for softness. I polished my boots until they gleamed brightly under the lights, completely ignoring Derek's cruel instructions. I pinned my miniature Army Cyber Command insignia directly to my lapel, a silent, powerful nod to the specific skills that had successfully dismantled their entire offshore empire. I looked at myself in the mirror. The exhausted, terrified mother crying in the freezing snowstorm was completely gone. The woman staring back was a lethal, highly trained operative holding the full weight of the federal government securely in her hands. I stepped back out into the command center. General Thorne looked up from the tactical map. He took in my sharp military suit and nodded in deep approval. "The extraction teams are fully in position," he stated. "You control the room. It is time to crash the party. Let us go." The grand ballroom of the prestigious downtown Chicago hotel was a masterclass in aggressive opulence. Thousands of pieces of cut crystal caught the bright illumination from the massive chandeliers overhead, casting a dazzling fractured glow across the sprawling room. Waiters in crisp black tuxedos moved seamlessly through the crowd of socialites and corporate executives, balancing silver trays of expensive appetizers and maintaining the structural integrity of three massive cascading champagne towers. The volume of wealth packed into the room was staggering. In the center of the opulent space, a raised platform had been constructed for this very historic announcement. Lighting rigs flanked the grand stage, illuminating the wealthy couple of the hour. Local financial news networks had dispatched their top anchors to cover the merger live, and heavy television cameras with bright red recording lights were strategically positioned around the perimeter, broadcasting the lavish celebration to viewers across the entire state. In the front row, directly beneath the brilliant stage lights, stood Martha. She wore an excessively glittering gown that looked desperately expensive, holding a flute of vintage champagne. She practically vibrated with smug satisfaction. She held court among a circle of elite, heavily Botoxed socialites who hung on to her every single word. Martha pointed proudly toward the stage, her voice projecting loudly over the elegant string quartet playing in the background. "Look at him," she boasted, gesturing wildly with her free hand. "My son Derek is an absolute financial genius. He single-handedly orchestrated this colossal merger. And look at his stunning new fiancée. Camilla is a billionaire, a true woman of high society, and she recognizes true talent. This is the life Derek was always destined for." He finally shed the dead weight from his past and claimed his rightful place among the elite. The surrounding women nodded in polite agreement, completely unaware that the man on the stage was currently funding their expensive drinks with stolen military pensions. Up on the grand stage, Camilla approached the polished acrylic podium. She wore a tailored diamond-encrusted gown that screamed untouchable power. Derek stood half a step behind her, looking like a perfectly groomed accessory in his custom Italian tuxedo. Camilla tapped the microphone, and the loud chatter of the ballroom instantly hushed. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," she began, her voice projecting a smooth, practiced authority. "Tonight, we are not just celebrating a historic financial merger. We are celebrating the core values that built our incredible firm. Wealth, unwavering integrity, and the unrelenting vision required to build a lasting empire. We have always believed that true success comes to those who refuse to settle for mediocrity." Beside her, Derek nodded solemnly, playing the part of the brilliant financial architect to absolute perfection. He smiled warmly at the flashing cameras, exuding the calm, unshakable confidence of a man who believed he had completely won the game. Yet despite his polished public facade, Derek kept darting his eyes nervously away from the flashing camera lenses. His gaze repeatedly flicked toward the heavy brass-handled swinging doors at the far back of the ballroom, the designated service entrance for the catering staff. He was not looking for more champagne. He was eagerly waiting for his cruel trap to spring shut. He kept checking his expensive gold watch, his anticipation growing with each passing second. He fully expected the heavy doors to open and reveal his thoroughly broken ex-wife. He was waiting to see me stumble into the bright ballroom, wearing a cheap stained polyester waitress uniform, carrying a heavy tray of appetizers. He wanted the supreme satisfaction of watching me serve hot food platters directly to his wealthy colleagues. He had meticulously planned this exact moment. He wanted to casually signal me over to the stage, perhaps loudly demand a fresh napkin, or complain about the temperature of the food, just to publicly humiliate me in front of the local news cameras and the entire Chicago financial elite. He wanted to look down from his grand stage and watch the mother of his newborn children completely break under the weight of her own poverty. Every time a waiter emerged from the kitchen doors, Derek leaned forward slightly, his cruel smirk widening only to pull back in visible disappointment when it was just another faceless employee. He patted his jacket pocket, likely feeling the reassuring weight of the small stack of cash he planned to throw at my feet, like pity money. He leaned closer to Camilla and whispered something in her ear, making her laugh, a sharp, arrogant sound that echoed through the microphone. They were completely drunk on their own perceived invincibility. They truly believed they had successfully rewritten reality, transforming themselves into corporate royalty while leaving me to rot in the freezing gutters of the city. The sheer arrogance radiating from the stage was almost palpable, a thick, suffocating cloud of unearned triumph. They were standing on a fragile glass floor suspended high above a massive federal investigation, and they were completely oblivious to the heavy hammers swinging rapidly toward their ankles. He adjusted his dark tie, smiling broadly, as a prominent financial journalist raised a microphone to ask a question about the recent spectacular growth. Derek stepped up to the podium, ready to deliver another fabricated speech about his brilliant market strategies. He was putting on the absolute greatest show of his life, entirely unaware that the audience he truly needed to impress was heavily armed and currently surrounding the building. Outside the Grand Hotel, the flashing red and blue lights of federal tactical vehicles remained completely hidden from view. Inside the ballroom, the elegant string quartet played a soft, triumphant melody, lulling every single criminal in the room into a deep, completely false sense of absolute security. Derek leaned confidently against the acrylic podium, feeling completely untouchable. He stared hard at the service doors, eagerly waiting for his helpless victim to arrive. He was ready for his glorious moment. He was ready for his glorious moment. The heavy, ornate mahogany doors at the very back of the grand ballroom did not simply swing open. They were pushed wide with a violent, authoritative force that completely shattered the delicate ambiance of the lavish celebration. The heavy brass handles slammed loudly against the adjacent wood-paneled walls, sending a sharp echoing crack through the cavernous space. The elegant string quartet, previously playing a soft classical melody, screeched to a sudden, discordant halt. Cellos and violins whimpered into complete silence as the musicians lowered their bows in sheer confusion. Every head in the opulent room whipped around to look at the entrance. Through the wide entryway strode two massive men wearing dark tactical windbreakers. The bright yellow lettering across their chests read FBI on the left and SEC on the right. They moved with absolute military precision, quickly securing the perimeter of the double doors. The wealthy socialites and corporate executives standing near the back immediately gasped and scrambled backward, spilling expensive champagne onto the imported carpets as they desperately tried to clear a wide path. Then I stepped through the threshold. I was not carrying a silver tray of appetizers. I was not wearing a stained, cheap polyester waitress uniform. There were no tears glistening in my eyes, and no trace of the broken, terrified mother who had fled into a blizzard just days prior. I wore my sharp-tailored navy blue power suit, the gleaming gold buttons catching the brilliant light of the crystal chandeliers suspended high above. My hair was pulled back into a severe, flawless military regulation bun. The miniature Army Cyber Command insignia pinned to my lapel gleamed like a dangerous warning beacon. I walked with absolute authority, my heavy boots striking the polished marble floor in a steady, relentless rhythm. Two more federal agents flanked me closely, their expressions hardened into masks of pure legal execution. We formed an unstoppable spearhead of federal power, cutting directly through the absolute center of Chicago high society. The initial murmur of annoyance from the elite guests instantly evaporated entirely, replaced by a breathless, terrified silence. The massive television cameras previously locked onto the grand stage to broadcast the historic merger suddenly abandoned their programming. The camera operators rapidly pivoted their heavy lenses on their tripods, panning downwards to capture my entrance. The bright red recording lights blinked rhythmically, broadcasting this unexpected disruption live to thousands of viewers across the entire state. Up on the brightly lit stage, Derek's perfectly rehearsed, smug smile violently faltered. The color completely drained from his face for a fraction of a second as his brain struggled to process my appearance. He had been expecting a pathetic, defeated victim practically begging for spare change. Instead, he was staring down at a tactical federal raid led by his own ex-wife. Beside him, Camilla shifted uneasily in her diamond-encrusted gown. Her sharp eyes darted quickly toward the federal windbreakers, her corporate survival instincts finally detecting the massive threat looming over her event. However, Derek's monumental arrogance quickly overrode his basic common sense. He gripped the edges of the clear acrylic podium so tightly his knuckles turned white. Refusing to believe his absolute power was currently being dismantled, he leaned aggressively into the microphone. His voice boomed through the massive speakers suspended from the ballroom ceiling, desperate to regain total control of his rapidly crumbling narrative. "Audrey, I told you to use the service entrance," Derek announced, his tone dripping with condescending authority, attempting to paint me as an unruly catering employee who had lost her mind. "This is a private, highly secure corporate event. You are making a fool of yourself in front of my investors." He raised his hand and pointed sharply toward the back of the room. "Security, remove this woman." Three large hotel security guards in black suits hurried forward from the shadows, reaching out to grab my arms and forcefully escort me out. They did not take a step further. The lead FBI agent flanking my right side simply turned his head, locking eyes with the approaching guards, and swiftly flashed a gold federal badge from inside his jacket. The security guards froze instantly. They raised their empty hands in rapid surrender and backed away slowly, completely terrified of interfering with a massive federal operation. The room watched in shock as the hotel security abandoned Derek completely. In the front row, Martha jumped to her feet. Her glittering gown rustled loudly as her face contorted into an ugly mask of outrage. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, pointing her champagne flute directly at me. "You ungrateful wretch! How dare you ruin my son's engagement party? Somebody call the police and have her arrested for trespassing right this second." I completely ignored Martha's hysterical screaming. I kept my gaze locked forward, walking with a measured, unstoppable pace until I reached the exact center of the sprawling ballroom. The sea of wealthy guests had completely parted, creating a wide, empty circle around me and my federal escort. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy and suffocating. The air smelled of expensive perfume and sudden raw fear. The only sound was the hum of the television cameras zooming in to capture my face. I stopped perfectly still. I turned my head slowly to the left, looking directly into the lens of the local financial news camera. I held the intense gaze of the broadcasting lens for 2 full seconds, ensuring that every viewer watching at home, every corporate regulator, and every military veteran understood exactly who was currently controlling this room. Then I turned my attention back to the grand stage. I looked up at Derek. The psychological power dynamic in the room shattered and violently reversed in that extended moment. He was standing on a raised platform surrounded by expensive lights and powerful people, yet he looked incredibly small, fragile, and utterly terrified. A thick bead of sweat formed on his forehead. His breathing had become shallow and rapid. The microphone picked up the nervous, ragged sound of him swallowing hard. I did not need a microphone to address him. My voice, honed by years of commanding troops in chaotic environments, projected clearly and sharply across the silent ballroom, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers and striking him directly in the chest. "I am not here to serve drinks, Derek." I stated my words, cutting through the tense air like razor blades. Every syllable was precise, calculated, and devastatingly cold. "I am here representing the Department of Defense and the Federal Trade Commission." I slowly raised my right hand, lifting the small encrypted flash drive high above my head for the entire room to see. The bright television cameras reflected off its cold metallic surface. It was a tiny device, yet it held the absolute destruction of their entire empire. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Every guest held their breath, paralyzed by the shift in reality. I shifted my gaze away from Derek, locking eyes directly with the woman standing beside him in her diamond-encrusted gown. Camilla stared back, her posture stiffening as the federal reality breached her corporate ego. I spoke clearly into the silence, ensuring my voice carried directly into the broadcasting microphones. "Camilla, your offshore accounts in the Caymans have just been frozen by the federal government for defrauding the military pension fund of $40 million. The words landed like the physical detonation. A collective gasp rippled through the sea of wealthy socialites and corporate executives. Investors who had trusted her firm immediately realized their money was tied to a massive federal crime. Whispers erupted into panicked murmurs across the floor. Up on the stage, Camilla's perfectly contoured face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. The impenetrable armor of her billionaire persona shattered instantly under the blinding glare of the television lights. She frantically snatched her designer evening bag from the podium and dug her trembling fingers inside, completely abandoning her poised executive facade. She yanked out her smartphone, her manicured thumbs flying across the screen as she desperately dialed her private offshore wealth manager. The microphone on the podium picked up the frantic tapping of her screen and the heavy, ragged sound of her breathing. She paced back and forth across the stage, ignoring the hundreds of elite guests watching her self-destruct on live television. "Answer the phone," she hissed into the receiver, her voice shrill and breaking. "Answer the damn phone." The silence of the room was punctured by a loud automated voice bleating from her phone speaker. "The number you are trying to reach has been disconnected." The offshore bankers, sensing the massive federal sweep, had completely abandoned her, cutting all ties to save themselves from the impending indictment. Camilla stared at the phone screen, her eyes wide with mounting terror. She swiftly opened her mobile banking application, furiously swiping to refresh her primary financial dashboards. The massive television cameras zoomed in on her face, broadcasting every micro-expression of her total collapse. I watched from the center of the ballroom as the digital reality of her situation fully materialized. The screen refreshed. Her multi-million-dollar balances vanished, replaced by glaring red zeros and federal seizure notices. Her hands shook so violently that she dropped the expensive smartphone. It hit the polished stage floor with a sharp crack, the screen shattering into dozens of jagged pieces. At that exact moment, a series of rapid, high-pitched alert chimes began echoing from the smartwatches of several catering managers and event coordinators standing near the perimeter of the room. The lead event planner stepped forward, holding up a digital payment terminal. "Ma'am," the planner announced, his voice carrying over the stunned crowd. "The primary credit accounts on file for this gala have just declined. Every single black card has been officially deactivated by the issuing banks." Camilla staggered backward, her diamond-encrusted heels catching on the edge of the stage carpet. She grabbed the podium to steady herself, her breath coming in short, hyperventilating gasps. She had spent her life stepping on anyone beneath her, wielding her immense wealth as a weapon to destroy people she deemed insignificant. Now stripped of her stolen billions, she was absolutely nothing. The federal government had reduced her net worth to zero in a matter of minutes. The untouchable queen of Chicago finance was officially broke, and the entire city was watching her drowning on live television. Derek watched Camilla collapse against the podium. The reality of the federal raid finally penetrated his thick skull. He looked at the FBI agents flanking my sides, then at the camera crews documenting his total ruin. The grand illusion of his high society life evaporated, leaving only a terrified, pathetic man desperate to save his own skin. He realized the senior partner promotion he had bragged about was the exact mechanism tying him to the $40 million fraud. The very title he had traded his family for was now an anchor dragging him straight to a federal penitentiary. His survival instincts kicked in, completely devoid of any loyalty or honor. He violently backed away from Camilla, putting as much physical distance between himself and his fiancée as the stage would allow. He raised his hands high in the air, palms facing outward in a frantic gesture of surrender, his entire body trembling uncontrollably. He looked directly at the lead FBI agent standing beside me. "It was all her," Derek shouted, his voice cracking with pure cowardice. "I did not know anything about the offshore accounts. I swear to God I did not know. I was just an employee following her orders. She made me sign those papers. It was all her idea." Camilla whipped her head around, staring at the man she had just announced as her brilliant partner. Her shock quickly morphed into absolute disgust. He was throwing her under the proverbial bus, without a single second of hesitation, proving his absolute lack of loyalty to anyone but himself. He had betrayed his wife, abandoned his premature infants in a freezing blizzard, and now he was immediately betraying the very woman he claimed to love just to avoid wearing federal handcuffs. He was an empty shell of a man, devoid of any real substance or integrity. The crowd erupted into loud, angry shouts as the investors realized the sheer scale of the deception. The federal agents beside me moved forward, their faces hardened with professional resolve, ready to execute the final phase of our very meticulously planned operation. The federal agents beside me moved forward, their faces hardened with professional resolve, ready to execute the final phase of our very meticulously planned operation. The crowd parted further, creating a wide aisle leading directly toward the grand stage. From the dense cluster of shocked socialites and paralyzed corporate executives on the right side of the ballroom, a solitary figure emerged. Naomi stepped out from the crowd of guests. She was not wearing an extravagant gown or sparkling diamonds. She wore a sharp, structured gray business suit carrying a thick, heavy physical ledger securely under her left arm. She walked with a calm, deliberate cadence, her head held high, completely ignoring the bewildered stares of the Chicago elite. In the front row, Martha stood frozen in absolute disbelief. Her eyes darted wildly between me and her daughter-in-law. The sheer impossibility of the scene unfolding before her seemed to short-circuit her brain. Martha gasped loudly, her voice piercing the tense atmosphere of the room. "Naomi, what are you doing with her?" Martha demanded, her tone laced with her usual demanding authority. "Get away from that woman immediately. She is trying to ruin your brother-in-law." Naomi did not even glance in Martha's direction. She continued her approach until she stood directly beside me at the center of the ballroom. She looked up at the stage, her dark eyes locking onto Derek's terrified, pale face. Without breaking eye contact with the man who had tormented her family for years, Naomi handed the thick physical ledger directly to the lead FBI agent standing on my right. The agent took the heavy book, opening it to reveal hundreds of pages of meticulously highlighted bank transfers, corporate routing numbers, and unauthorized wire authorizations. "I audited your fake shell companies," Naomi stated. Her voice was not loud, but the absolute clarity of her words resonated through the high-definition microphones surrounding the stage. The entire ballroom listened in stunned silence. "You thought you covered your digital tracks by layering transactions through Camilla's offshore accounts," Naomi continued, her tone strictly professional, like she was delivering a corporate report. "But you made extremely sloppy errors. You used overlapping IP addresses and duplicate vendor invoices. You left a trail of financial breadcrumbs that a first-year accounting student could easily follow." Derek gripped his hair with both hands, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find an excuse. He realized the woman his mother constantly belittled at family dinners was the exact forensic auditor who systematically dismantled his entire illegal enterprise. "You did not just steal from the military pension fund," Naomi said, her voice dropping an octave, losing its clinical detachment and filling with raw, personal anger. "You were desperate when the market turned against you last quarter. You faced catastrophic margin calls and needed immediate liquid capital to prevent the offshore accounts from completely defaulting. You did not just steal from veterans. You stole the college funds of your own niece and nephew to cover your margin calls." A collective gasp of sheer horror rippled through the audience. Stealing from faceless institutions was a white-collar crime, but stealing the future of your own brother's children was a profound, unforgivable betrayal. Up on the stage, Derek physically recoiled as if he had been struck. He looked at the television cameras, realizing his total moral bankruptcy was now public record. He had drained the savings accounts of Gavin and Naomi's children to maintain his illusion of wealth and secure his fraudulent promotion. Martha, unable to process the destruction of her golden child, completely snapped. Her carefully crafted high society persona evaporated, entirely replaced by vicious, unhinged malice. She pushed past a wealthy investor and charged toward the center of the room. She pointed a trembling diamond-adorned finger directly at Naomi's face. "You are lying!" Martha screamed, using her usual degrading tone, the exact same voice she had used for years to make Naomi feel small and unwelcome. "You vindictive, jealous little liar. You have always hated my family. You have always been envious of Derek's success. Because Gavin could never provide for you the way Derek provides for Camilla. You fabricated these numbers because you are bitter. You do not belong here. You never belonged in our family. Naomi stood perfectly still, letting Martha's toxic tirade fill the opulent ballroom. She did not raise her voice. She did not flinch. She simply let Martha expose her own vile nature to the hundreds of powerful guests watching her absolute meltdown. The television cameras zoomed in close, broadcasting the ugly reality of Martha's entitlement to everyone watching the evening news at home. When Martha finally paused to draw a ragged breath, Naomi cut her off cleanly, slicing through the older woman's hysteria with cold, undeniable truth. "Your son is not a financial genius, Martha." Naomi declared, her words striking with the precision of a scalpel. "He is a thief and you are his accomplice." Martha staggered backward as if physically wounded. The accusation hung heavy in the air, instantly shifting the focus of the federal agents. Naomi turned to the lead FBI investigator and pointed directly at Martha. "Check the physical ledger I just handed you," Naomi instructed him. "Look at the transaction logs from exactly 4 days ago. When Derek needed collateral to secure his final fraudulent loan, he could not use his own assets. He needed high-value real estate. Martha actively assisted him in forging Audrey's signature to illegally leverage the Beacon Hill property. She is a direct active participant in this criminal conspiracy." The guests surrounding Martha immediately backed away, treating her like a contagious disease. The wealthy friends she had been boasting to just minutes prior now looked at her with unadulterated disgust. The federal agents shifted their tactical positions, forming a perimeter that effectively trapped both criminals on the stage and the accomplice on the floor. The net was drawn tight. There was absolutely no escape. The undeniable weight of the evidence crushed any remaining defiance. Derek fell to his knees on the stage, entirely defeated. Camilla simply stared blankly at her shattered phone, finally understanding the true magnitude of her absolute destruction. The meticulously constructed illusion of their empire had collapsed into dust. Absolute justice had finally arrived. Absolute justice arrived. The grand ballroom transformed into an arena of severe legal consequence. Flashing red lights from television cameras cast harsh shadows across terrified socialites, witnessing the destruction of an empire. Yet even as her son wept and federal agents tightened their perimeter, Martha refused to accept defeat. Her aggressive pride blinded her to reality. She frantically scrambled to regain control, desperately, grasping for the one weapon she believed she still held over my head. Martha straightened her spine, smoothing her expensive gown with trembling hands. She tilted her chin upward, attempting to project a facade of superiority. Glaring at me, her eyes burned with desperate hatred. She angrily pointed her right finger directly at my chest, completely ignoring the armed federal investigators standing inches away. "You think you have won?" Martha screamed, her voice echoing across the silent room. "You think this theatrical display changes anything? You are still an absolute failure, Audrey. You have nothing. We took your precious house. We took your assets. The bank is foreclosing on that property tomorrow morning. You are homeless. You and those pathetic brats will be sleeping on the frozen streets of Chicago tonight. You cannot touch us because you do not possess the financial resources to fight back." Her shrill laughter pierced the tense atmosphere, revealing the depths of her delusion. She believed her fabricated reality. She thought throwing a vulnerable mother out into a winter blizzard was a brilliant tactical maneuver. She stood there confessing her malicious intent to a room full of federal authorities and rolling cameras. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or react to her psychological warfare. Instead, I maintained my military posture, letting her desperate words hang in the air. The wealthy guests who had previously admired her now stared in revulsion. I reached inside the breast pocket of my power suit. My movements were deliberate and controlled. I retrieved a thick federal document bound by a government seal. I slowly held the document up, ensuring television cameras had a perfect view of the federal insignia. "You mean the house you fraudulently used as collateral by forging my signature while I was incapacitated in the ICU?" I asked, my voice carrying an icy calm. "You mean the property you illegally leveraged to secure a corporate loan for your son because his offshore shell accounts were failing?" Martha swallowed hard, but she kept her chin raised. The bank approved the loan, she retorted defensively. You cannot stop a commercial foreclosure. It is entirely out of your hands. I stepped forward, moving purposefully toward the cocktail table next to where Martha stood. I slammed the heavy federal document directly onto the polished glass surface. Martha jumped backward. You underestimate the capabilities of the federal government, Martha, I stated, locking my eyes on hers. When you committed identity theft against a disabled veteran to defraud a bank, you triggered a federal response. The Securities and Exchange Commission, acting in conjunction with the Department of Defense, intervened immediately. The federal government seized the fraudulent debt this afternoon. The bank was forced to nullify the illegal loan to avoid criminal prosecution for facilitating money laundering. I tapped the heavy document with my index finger, emphasizing every single devastating syllable. The pre-foreclosure status has been erased from the public record. The toxic debt you tried to bury me under has been liquidated. I own the property free and clear. It is solely in my name, and you have zero legal claim to a single square inch of the floorboards. The reality of my words hit Martha with the force of a physical blow. Her mouth fell open, her jaw going slack. The desperate smirk vanished from her face, replaced by sheer terror. She looked wildly toward the stage, searching for Derek to fix the situation, but her son was kneeling on the floor, weeping silently, broken by his impending incarceration. The financial fortress they built to keep me out had crumbled, crushing them beneath the weight of their own criminal greed. I was not quite finished with her yet. I stepped into Martha's personal space, forcing her to look up into my eyes. I wanted her to see the absolute resolve of the woman she had mercilessly abused and underestimated for years. The federal agents shifted their stance, allowing me room to deliver the final blow. You have 24 hours to pack your bags and leave, I commanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous register that demanded immediate obedience. If I find a single piece of your belongings remaining on my property after that deadline, I will throw it into the freezing street. If you attempt to stay, or if you step foot near my children again, I will have the local police arrest you for trespassing, and I will hand these investigators every piece of evidence they need to prosecute you for the forgery. Martha physically crumbled. Her knees gave out, and she collapsed into a plush velvet chair behind her. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as she began sobbing hysterically. The ugly sounds of her absolute defeat echoed through the silent ballroom. The wealthy socialites and high-powered executives she had spent years desperately trying to impress backed away from her. They gathered their coats and designer bags, averting their eyes in disgust. They wanted nothing to do with a woman who would forge documents and throw her newborn grandchildren into a blizzard. I turned away from her, feeling a sense of liberation. The heavy, suffocating chains of their toxic family dynamic had been shattered. I adjusted the lapel of my military-inspired suit, ensuring the Cyber Command insignia sat straight. I looked toward General Thorne and Director Vance, who both gave me a nod of professional respect. The operation was a complete, undeniable success. The ambush I had meticulously planned and flawlessly executed had systematically dismantled every single weapon my enemies possessed. The lead investigator gave a definitive nod. The specialized unit moved in perfect synchronization. 4 armed FBI agents ascended the steps of the grand stage. Their boots thudded against the wooden platform, replacing elegant string music with the terrifying cadence of a raid. Television lighting rigs set up to capture a glorious victory illuminated the absolute destruction of 2 criminals. Local news crews aggressively repositioned their heavy cameras. They zoomed their lenses tightly onto the stage, ensuring not a single second of the high-profile arrests escaped the live broadcast feed. Up on the platform, Camilla finally broke. The cold billionaire who orchestrated the theft of millions from military veterans lost her maintained composure. As the first FBI agent reached her side and grasped her silk-clad shoulder, her elite facade evaporated. She thrashed wildly, her diamond-encrusted heels slipping on the polished surface. "Get your hands off me!" she shrieked, her voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. "Do you have any idea who I am? I demand you call my lawyers immediately." The agent remained unfazed by her hysterical outburst. He smoothly twisted her arms behind her back. The sharp click of heavy metal handcuffs snapping shut echoed through the ballroom microphones. The sound signaled the absolute termination of her fraudulent reign. Camilla thrashed against the restraint, completely ruining her expensive designer gown. She whipped her head around, glaring fiercely at the media personnel documenting her downfall. "Turn those cameras off!" she screamed at the journalists, her face contorted in a mask of desperate rage. "Stop recording me right now. I will sue every single network into bankruptcy." The camera operators did not flinch. They kept the recording lights glowing steadily, capturing the spectacular meltdown of the arrogant financial predator. Her shrieks fueled the relentless media spectacle. She was no longer a revered corporate titan. She was a publicly exposed criminal throwing a pathetic temper tantrum on live television. The federal agents surrounded her, neutralizing her frantic struggles. They marched her toward the doors at the back of the ballroom, parading her past the elite guests she had planned to impress. The wealthy socialites turned their backs, eager to distance themselves from her federal indictment. With Camilla detained, the remaining FBI agents turned their attention to Derek. My husband had not moved an inch since the raid began. He remained slumped on the stage floor. His custom tuxedo hopelessly wrinkled his face, buried deep in his hands. The arrogant man who laughed while I stood in a freezing blizzard was gone. He was nothing but a hollow shell, thoroughly crushed under the immense weight of the federal trap Camilla built for him. Two agents stepped forward, hoisting Derek up by his arms. He offered no physical resistance. He was completely limp, his legs trembling so violently they could barely support his weight. The agents quickly pulled his arms behind his back. A second pair of heavy handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, securing his fate. The harsh reality of his impending 15-year prison sentence finally penetrated his thick skull. The terror in his eyes was absolute. Derek violently twisted his head, scanning the massive ballroom until his panicked gaze locked onto me. I stood perfectly still in the center of the room, my military power suit immaculate, my expression unreadable. Seeing me standing there, flanked by federal authority, completely broke whatever tiny fraction of pride he had left. He realized I was the only person on the entire planet who possessed the power to influence the task force. Derek dropped to his knees right there on the illuminated stage. He ignored the federal agents actively trying to pull him back to his feet. He ignored the flashing cameras broadcasting his humiliation to the entire state. He leaned forward as far as the agents would allow, staring down at me with pathetic, tear-filled eyes. "Audrey, please!" Derek cried, his voice breaking into a wretched, desperate sob that echoed loudly through the event microphones. "Please, you have to stop them. Tell them it was a mistake. I am the father of your children. We were building a family together. You cannot just let them lock me away. Audrey, please, do not do this to me." I stared up at the kneeling man. He actively begged for mercy, using the very children he had abandoned just days prior. He invoked the title of father only when he desperately needed a human shield to block a prison sentence. I felt zero pity for him. The emotional tether connecting me to this man was permanently severed the moment he threw my newborns into the brutal winter storm. I maintained a posture of unyielding stone. I took one step forward, ensuring my voice would be perfectly captured by the surrounding microphones. I looked down at him with an expression of pure, unbreakable ice. "You told me there was no room for me in your life, Derek," I stated, delivering the ultimate callback with razor-sharp precision. My voice was calm, perfectly measured, and devastatingly final. "Enjoy your new room. It is 6 by 8 feet, and it is all yours." Derek let out a loud wail of defeat. The agents did not give him another second to beg. They grabbed him firmly by his shoulders and hauled him off the ground. The news cameras tracked his every movement as the agents dragged him across the stage and marched him down the center aisle. His shoes dragged against the thick carpets. Tears streamed down his face, ruining his polished appearance. He wept openly, sobbing hysterically, as the agents hauled him past his own mother, who remained slumped in her velvet chair, paralyzed by shock. The cameras captured the collapse of his life. He was paraded through the massive oak doors, leaving the opulent ballroom behind forever. The massive doors swung firmly shut behind him, plunging him into the dark reality of federal custody and leaving me standing completely victorious in the very bright, blinding light. 6 months have passed since the heavy oak doors of that ballroom slammed shut on my former life. The chaotic media circus surrounding the federal raid eventually faded, replaced by the swift and brutal efficiency of the justice system. Camilla and Derek faced a mountain of irrefutable evidence. Their high-priced defense attorneys took one look at the decrypted offshore ledgers, the forged notary logs, and the explicit internal memorandums, and immediately advised them to take a plea deal. They had completely defrauded a military pension fund, an act of treasonous greed that infuriated the presiding federal judge. The gavel came down with absolute finality. Derek is currently serving a mandatory 15-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The man who once bragged about custom-tailored Italian suits and limitless expense accounts now wears a standardized orange jumpsuit. His world has been permanently reduced to concrete walls and rigid schedules dictated by armed guards. He lost his wealth, his freedom, and his completely unearned arrogance. Every Sunday afternoon, the secure line on my phone rings. Derek uses his single allotted weekly phone call to reach out from the prison facility. He spends the entire incredibly brief transmission begging for my forgiveness. He cries through the receiver, his voice echoing with genuine despair, pleading for just one opportunity to see the twins. He talks about how much he misses his family conveniently, forgetting that he was the one who locked his premature infants out in a brutal blizzard. I do not shout at him. I do not remind him of his staggering cruelty or the fraudulent mortgage he helped forge. I simply sit in my comfortable leather chair and listen to his pathetic, desperate pleas in total silence. I let him hear the quiet, steady rhythm of my breathing, proving that his emotional manipulation no longer holds any power over my mind. When the automated prison recording announces that he has 30 seconds remaining, I do not say a single word. I simply press the red button to terminate the connection. Yesterday, after hanging up on his weeping voice, I navigated to my phone settings and permanently blocked the penitentiary routing number. His absolute isolation is now complete. While Derek rots in a federal cell, his mother faces a uniquely poetic form of karmic justice. Martha completely lost her lavish suburban estate to settle the massive legal fees and federal fines resulting from her active role in the mortgage forgery. Stripped of her stolen wealth and her highly coveted social standing, she was forced to seek minimum wage employment just to survive. By a stroke of absolute beautiful irony, she is now working as a full-time housekeeper at the exact same dingy, freezing motel on the industrial outskirts of Chicago where she had forced me to hide. She spends her days scrubbing deeply stained carpets and replacing cheap linens under the harsh glare of erratic neon signs. Occasionally, the elite socialites she used to host for expensive afternoon tea drive past the motel on their way to the highway. If they happen to spot Martha hauling a heavy trash bag across the icy parking lot, they simply roll up their tinted windows and turn their heads, pretending they do not know the disgraced woman in the soiled uniform. She traded her soul for high society, and high society discarded her the second her bank accounts ran dry. My reality sits in stark contrast to their misery. I am sitting in the living room of my beautifully restored Beacon Hill-style home. The house is incredibly warm, completely safe, and legally mine-free and clear. The toxic energy that once poisoned these walls has been entirely eradicated. The twins are thriving beautifully, meeting every single developmental milestone with bright smiles and endless energy. The dark shadows of their traumatic premature birth have vanished, replaced by the joyful chaos of healthy growing children. I did not rebuild this life alone. Today is Sunday, and the house is filled with the rich aroma of roasted vegetables and fresh bread. Naomi and Gavin are over for our weekly family dinner. Gavin completely severed ties with his mother and brother after the truth was exposed on live television. He chose integrity over a toxic bloodline. Naomi sits on my plush rug playing peekaboo with my twins, while her own children build a massive block tower nearby. We share knowing smiles across the room. We are not just relatives by marriage anymore. We are a chosen, healthy family forged in the fires of mutual respect and genuine loyalty. The federal task force officially closed their investigation last month, securing the pensions of thousands of military veterans. My cyber consulting firm is expanding rapidly, securing high-level government contracts based entirely on my proven merit and absolute discretion. I have reclaimed my financial independence, my career, and my utter peace of mind. I walk over to the large bay window and look out at the serene, snow-covered streets of my beautiful neighborhood. The winter wind howls gently against the thick glass, but it cannot touch us in here anymore. I turn away from the window and look directly into the camera lens, speaking to anyone who has ever felt completely powerless against a manipulative family. They threw me into a freezing blizzard, expecting me to freeze and beg for mercy. They completely underestimated my strength and resilience. They did not realize I was the storm. Now I want to hear directly from you. Have you ever had to draw an absolute line in the sand and walk away from toxic relatives to protect your own peace and sanity? How did you manage to build your own chosen family after surviving profound emotional or severe financial betrayal? Drop your stories in the comment section below right now. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more content about claiming your power back. Stay strong, protect your boundaries, and never apologize for surviving. One of the most profound lessons to extract from Audrey's harrowing journey is that your self-worth and ultimate security can never rely on the validation of toxic individuals, even if they happen to be your own family or spouse. When Audrey was stripped of her financial safety net and literally locked out in a freezing blizzard by the man she loved, an ugly truth was exposed. Her mother-in-law's cruelty and her husband's blinding arrogance demonstrated a harsh reality. Legal or biological ties do not guarantee loyalty, respect, or love. However, instead of succumbing to their calculated abuse, Audrey realized that her power lay entirely within her own resilience, patience, and expertise. This story teaches us that true survival requires actively stepping out of the victim role that abusers desperately try to force upon us. Audrey weaponized her intellect, her military training, and her unyielding composure to completely dismantle a corrupt empire. She did not scream or beg when the system was initially turned against her. Instead, she patiently gathered undeniable evidence to protect her children and her future. Furthermore, Audrey's journey beautifully highlights the importance of a chosen family. While her husband betrayed her, her sister-in-law Naomi courageously stepped out of the shadows to become her greatest ally. We learn that establishing ironclad boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but a necessary life-saving measure of self-preservation. When you stop accepting the false narratives that toxic people project onto you, you finally regain the power to dictate your own path. Audrey's ultimate triumph serves as a powerful reminder that true strength is frequently forged in the fires of extreme adversity. When you are unexpectedly thrown into the cold, you do not have to freeze. You can deliberately choose to become the storm. If you have ever faced a profound betrayal, take a moment today to reevaluate your personal boundaries and firmly reclaim the absolute power over your own life story.